Thank you for having me here today. I am just here to tell you my own personal story about living with HIV and having received not one but 2 kidney transplants. I was first diagnosed with HIV back in 1990. I had a painful bout of shingles, and the doctor suggested I had the HIV test. The results were devastating. Not only was I HIV positive, but it seems that the disease had already progressed fairly far. It was essentially a death sentence at the time, and I did not have much time left. At that time, no one even spoke of HIV organ donations. It was just not relevant. If you had HIV, you died. That was it. The news was very depressing, obviously, but I decided to keep on working as long as I could. At the time, I was practicing energy law as an appellate litigator. It was very difficult work. The hours were long, the cases were complex, involved a lot of travel. But I decided that I would continue to work as long as I possibly could. Within a year, however, by 1991, my immune system had collapsed to the point that I was considered to have AIDS. Yet I continued to maintain my work schedule. I kept my condition private to myself at work. I didn't want pity from anybody, and I didn't want to be kept from the more challenging cases. However, the disease was just relentless. My health continued to decline, and by 1993, my T cells were essentially gone. I decided that it was time to retire, which I did. I purchased a burial plot. I even started to plan my own memorial service. It seemed that I would be dead at the age of 41. Just at that time, when I thought there was no hope, there was a new class of HIV drugs that was coming onto the market, and they were called protease inhibitors. I began to take them. The results were nothing short of remarkable. Very slowly, my immune system began to get stronger, and I felt much better. I felt like I was given a new life. My newfound optimism was not that long-lived, however. In 1995, I was diagnosed with a form of HIV-related kidney disease. My longtime partner, who does not have HIV, willingly said he would give one of his kidneys. However, the doctors at that time told me that they could not do that I was not eligible for a transplant. They told me it was just too dangerous to put immune-suppressing drugs that you need for a transplant to work into somebody who already had an immune problem. It was, as it subsequently turned out, that was not the case. I was told my only option was eventual dialysis. As you may know, dialysis is really only a short-term remedy. Mortality rate is very high. It's even higher for people with HIV. Now it seemed like I would not die from an infection from HIV, but that I would die from HIV-related kidney failure. To me, that did not seem like a lot of progress. I was both angry and frustrated. By 1999, my kidney function was so poor that I was constantly ill. I had a deathly pallor to me. A flight of stairs became daunting. I was hospitalized repeatedly. After one particular night in the hospital, my doctor came in and told me the next morning that unless I started dialysis, immediately I would be dead by the next day. I had no choice, and I agreed to the treatments. I made my dialysis appointments early in the morning, waking up at 5 o'clock, figuring that after dialysis, I would have the rest of the day to spend on more productive things. It turned out I was wrong. I knew that dialysis would be unpleasant, but the reality was far, far worse than I expected. Yes, there is a burden of being tethered to a machine several times a week to remove toxins from the blood and excess fluid from your body. There's a lot more though. It's really very hard to relate how exhausting, both mentally and physically, dialysis treatments are. I frequently suffered severe cramps and excruciating headaches. After a treatment, instead of doing something productive, I would more typically go home and spend the rest of the day on the couch or in bed. The days off dialysis were marginally better, but I had little energy and I had little interest in life. I had to carefully monitor everything that I ate and drank. Even on a hot summer's day, like we have here so often in DC, I could not have that extra glass of cold water, knowing that if I took it, I would have too much fluid, and I would end up spending the night sitting up, gasping for air, and in a panic. My social life became non-existent. Physically, I looked gaunt and pale. I shuffled rather than walked. If anyone here has had a loved one on dialysis, you can appreciate that life on dialysis is not really life, it's a shadow of living. It's simply existing. About the time I started dialysis, I discovered that in San Francisco they had successfully done a small number of transplants on people with HIV. I contacted the hospital and learned and offered to come out to San Francisco to be tested and see what they could do. Instead, they suggested that I contact Washington Hospital Center here because the hospital center was thinking about doing a transplant on someone with HIV. After all, I already had a willing donor. So I followed up and I talked to the transplant team at the hospital center. Although there was some disagreement at the hospital on whether to do this surgery, after all it was very, very new and only a handful of people had ever gotten this, Dr. Jimmy Light agreed to do the transplant. I was ecstatic. After testing, my partner proved to be a match. Not perfect, but good enough. I received my kidney in 2000. I felt better almost instantly. A good friend came to see me right after I got out of the ICU. Although I was in considerable pain and on very heavy medications, she was amazed at the way I looked. She told me that my skin now had a natural color to it, and there was a gleam back in my eyes. I was given a new life. I felt wonderful. The HIV was still ever present, and it reared its ugly head from time to time. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. While I was still unable to pursue a full-time legal career, I was able to use my abilities in the nonprofit world and for pro bono cases. Although the pro bono work was a lot less complex than my prior job, it provided an enormous amount of personal satisfaction. As luck would have it, though, my body began to slowly reject the new kidney. Chronic rejection is not that uncommon in people with organ transplants. By the end of 2008, I was on the verge of complete kidney failure again. But all in all, the transplant had lasted almost 9 years. And every year was a blessing. It seemed, though, that once again I was on the edge of medical technology. Johns Hopkins in Baltimore had a new technique. And that would allow my brother, who had stepped forward, to become a donor. My brother was more than willing to donate, but we had different blood types. So I talked to the people at Hopkins, and once again, this was a procedure that was not without risk. It essentially involved stripping my own body of all the antibodies in order to accept the new kidney. I was willing to take the risk, and Dr. Robert Montgomery up there was willing to do the operation. In February 2009, I got my second kidney transplant. 3 years later, I can report that all is well. The kidney is working absolutely fine. The HIV is under control. And I feel very, very good. I am very grateful to be alive. I certainly hope to never need another kidney. But if I do, I would not hesitate for a second to take one from an HIV deceased donor. I'm very lucky to have had two healthy donors in the backing of forward-thinking medical professionals. I will be forever in their debt. I know many are not as fortunate. If I had to wait for an organ from a deceased donor, I would have died waiting. Repealing this ban can provide those organs. We currently throw them away. They can be used to save lives. And they not only save the lives of people with HIV, but once you take somebody off of a kidney transplant waiting list, somebody else can move up, whether they have HIV or not. So by repealing this ban, everybody's suffering and chance of dying will decrease. As you may know, a portion of the AIDS quilt is on display starting today at the moment. I urge you to go see it. I have no doubt there are many names in the quilt of people who have died waiting for an organ that never came. I easily could have been one of them. Please do whatever you can to see that no more names are added because a person with HIV cannot get a life-saving transplant. Thank you very much.